Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. I'm your host Purushottam, and in today's video, we are going to talk about a core philosophy of Bhagwad Gita, the philosophy which is called Karma Yoga. Now, to begin with, Bhagwad Gita is such a powerful text that this requires a lifetime of repetition and revisiting the same concepts. And one funny thing you'll observe of the Gita is the content in the Gita is the same, right? It's not changing. But every time you read the Gita at different times of your life, you will unravel a new mystery. You will understand a deeper philosophy, a deeper sense of understanding will dawn upon you. Depending on the level of consciousness you are dispositioned in. Now, before diving deep into this core concept of Karma Yoga, a short note on spirituality in general. Now, if you are someone who has a bit of inclination towards spirituality and the aligned subjects, consider yourself to be very fortunate. Now, why do I say this, right? This whole philosophy which says one life, enjoy as much as you can, it's utter bogus. It's utter nonsense. Because now we have scientifically palpable evidences which says that, my dear ladies and gentlemen, we don't have one life. You and me have had many lives before, and we are going to have many lives later. We are essentially eternal spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. Now, this was talked about in the Bhagavad Gita 5000 years back, which today's modern day scientists are validating based on countless number of regression therapies and countless researches. Now, why did I bring up this point? Most of us think that the more we enjoy life, the more proficient we are, right? But let me ask you something. At the end of your life, you are not going to take all the material opulences with you. You are not going to take the memories which you created. But you are only going to take the spiritual acumen, the spiritual character which you build throughout your life. Now, this might be very difficult for some of you to digest. Some of us who have never been sort of exposed to the knowledge of spirituality. But if you are someone who has a slightest inclination towards this subjects of spirituality, consider yourself to be fortunate. Consider yourself to be a true Brahman. Now, Brahman, when we talk about the word Brahman, right, most of us think it's a particular religious sect or a particular caste clan, right, a particular caste clan. But let me give you what a true Brahman means. In the ancient culture, Brahmins were those people who had a lot of length and breadth understanding of spirituality. They understood that the core mission of a human's life is Adhato Brahma Jigyasa, meaning inquiry of the self. This was considered a true Brahman. But today, unfortunately, most of us associate Brahmins by being vegetarian. Being vegetarian is the understanding we have of who a Brahman is. But that's not what a true Brahman is. You might not be a Brahman from the caste system. But if you have this tendency, if you have this inquisitiveness towards Brahman, towards that eternal self, you, my friend, are a true Brahman. And there are countless fake Brahmins out there who have no interest and no spiritual inquisitiveness towards the subjects of spirituality, and they call themselves Brahmins. They are not Brahmins, they are just posing themselves to be Brahmins. Brahman is a person who has a deep, insightful interest, a passion towards unraveling these subjects. Now, if you look at society in general, right, we can classify society into three categories. Category number one, which I like to call the first class category, are those people who are materially opulent in the sense that they have all the luxuries and probably they are above average from all the societal standards, right? And they are considerably, comfortably rich people, and they are also spiritually opulent. They have certain practices or certain deeds which they have done over the period of their life, which they can call themselves that they are spiritually opulent as well. They have some amount of spiritual understanding. You might probably think, right, who could be a good example to sort of fit into that category? Shah Rukh Khan, Virat Kohli. These people are extremely successful in the material dimension, but they are spiritually opulent as well. Did you know that Shah Rukh Khan is a deeply religious person? He does his namaz every day, and he has a deep respect and belief in the idea of God. And Virat Kohli, probably most of you already know, he turned into a vegetarian and he follows the philosophy of Paramahamsa Yogananda, which was written in the famous book Autobiography of a Yogi. Now, though these people are not Brahmins by caste, but their conduct is Brahmanical, because they have spiritual understanding, they have inquisitiveness towards spirituality. So, you probably can question yourself whether you are a true Brahmin or whether you are just posing to be a Brahmin, right? Now, let's get back to the core focus of today's video. Now, before we start the core focus, let us talk about the other two classes, right? Now, I talked about the first class, about spiritually opulent and materially opulent. Now, there's a second class of individual who are materially opulent, but they don't have any understanding of spirituality. Now, these are the kind of people who always have a feeling of hollowness, a feeling of shallowness. They have everything which they need to gratify the senses, but they always have a feeling of emptiness within. They don't have a feeling of fulfillment, because somewhere down the line they are not engaged in spiritual practices. They don't have any degree of service integrated in your day-to-day life. That's why they feel shallow, they feel hollow, no matter how much they acquire and hoard. This is the reason why few of the Bollywood stars commit suicide, because they had everything which you and me cannot even imagine, but still they go into that category, they go into the chaotic mental state because they are spiritually uneducated. Now, this is a good place to be in, but it's a good place to be in only when things on the outside are great for you, are working for you. But not everything is going to be the way you want it, right? Sooner or later, if you don't cultivate spiritual knowledge, a spiritual understanding, sooner or later life is going to hit you. And when it hits you, you probably won't be able to handle it unless you develop spiritual acumen, spiritual understanding, concepts which are way beyond the physical dimensions. Now, there is a third class category as well. Now, why do I call it the third class category, right? Now, these are the kind of people who are spiritually uneducated and they are materially also not that successful. Now, this is a unique category of people, right? Because if you try to educate them on the different subtle subjects, they will immediately put on a defensive mechanism. They will say that they are very successful, though they live in absolutely impoverished surroundings. The place they live in probably looks like a slum. Probably they don't have a lot of material opulences, but they also talk ill of spirituality. They sort of abuse the Bhagwad Gita. But let us understand this, okay, that nobody can abuse spirituality or talk ill of Bhagwad Gita. Let me give you an example to illustrate. Now, suppose somebody spits on the sun. Somebody spits on the sun, do you think the spit will reach the sun? No, right? It will essentially backfire on the person who spat at the sun. This is what people are doing. They think abusing spirituality and talking ill of Bhagavad Gita is going to help them. But they don't realize how futile they are and how unfortunate these people are. Because if you don't have any understanding of these deeper concepts, you probably would not realize this now, but later in the line, you will realize what a gem of understanding you are alien to. Now, these three classifications, right, is a sort of an aberrant reminder for each one of us to assess our present level of consciousness. Because let's understand, towards the end of your life, right, no matter how successful you are from material standards, you're going to leave everything out of it. You're just going to leave everything, and the rich person, the CEO, gets buried next to a beggar. The only thing which we carry when we migrate from one body to another is the spiritual acumen, is our characteristics, is our habits, the notions, the sanskaras. So it's an absolute responsibility for each of us to build our spiritual acumen, to cultivate the strength of the spiritual spine. Hence, I think this gives it enough impetus to sort of understand spirituality, and don't think spirituality is boring. Spirituality probably will give you a higher taste, a taste which is beyond the material world, and it's also very intoxicating. And it will give you such unadulterated frame of mind, such unadulterated peace of mind, which is going to keep you always high. Now let's get back to the focus of today's video. Today's video is going to be about Karma Yoga. Now when we talk about Karma Yoga, right, the only understanding we have is just do your duties and just forget about the results. That's the understanding we have. Just do your duties and don't think about the results. Give up the attachment to the results. But some of you might ask that if I had to, don't not have the expectation of the results, then why do I even have to act? I mean, what's the motivation behind doing something if I had to give up the results of the fruits? Now, one very granular aspect here is that Lord Krishna in the Bhagwad Gita doesn't say that you shouldn't, expect anything. He essentially says, give up the attachment to the expectation you have. Now, this is a bit deep. Now, it doesn't say that you shouldn't even expect what you put your effort into. He's not saying that completely rush away, destroy the desire of the expectation that if I do this, I'll be getting a result. Essentially, what he's saying that most of us become so compulsive and so obsessive about our results that costs our peace of mind. Now, let's take a very interesting and a very simple example. Now, suppose you are someone who has a goal, right? Suppose you are probably having 90 kilos of body weight and you set up a goal for yourself that in the next 6 months, I am going to reduce my weight to sort of somewhere around 78 or 80. Now, there can be n number of reasons why you are not able to achieve that goal. Some can come from you, but some can come from the outside. Now, depending on whether you are able to accomplish that goal or not, that's immaterial. How much progress were you able to do in the journey is what matters. Because let's remember, not everything which we set up as our goals, we will achieve 100% out of it. The goal is not the result, but the process, the person we became in endeavoring towards that goal is the true result, is the true price. Now, even in the 6 months, if you fall short of your goal of reducing 10 kilos by 2 or 3 kilos, it doesn't matter. But the kind of person you became in trying to endeavoring for that goal is what matters, because that forged a character in you. A character of discipline and grit was cultivated in your consciousness. And when Lord Krishna says this, right, he is essentially pointing towards the aspect where human beings become absolutely fixated and obsessive about the kind of results they want. He's not saying that don't expect, he's saying give up the excessive attachment to the results. And whatever results you get, accept it humbly. Because let's understand this, the more we lament, right? Now let's say we do something and we don't get the result out of it. Now either we can be frustrated, either we can lament, or we can introspect as to how better I can perform the next time. The third option is the more wise option. And the more detached you are from the results, the easier it is to introspect. Otherwise, you will always be stuck in this infinite loop where you are always going to blame the world, you are always going to blame the circumstances as to why you are not able to achieve that. But instead, you can take personal responsibility and strive even better with the experiences and the learnings you have got from this present failure. This Karma Yoga talks about this deep understanding to cultivate so that we stop obsessing our things. Most of us, if you look at the number one reason for stress, right, there are essentially 3 people who become stressful, who are habitants of stress. People who are control freaks, right? They want everything as per their understanding. The results they need is basically their understanding. If something goes out of their control, out of their sense of control, proprietorship, that makes them anxious. And once you realize that there are certain things which are within your control and there are certain things which are outside your control, then you will garner this wisdom and understanding that it's so stupid to fret over things you can't control. Things you can control, the things you can contribute, there's no reason to take stress on those either, because they are in your control, right? Essentially, there is no need to take stress, but we are so habituated and we think that without stress we won't progress. Now, this is again a wrong belief system to have. You can be absolutely blissful, you can be absolutely contented, yet ambitious. Though this might seem ironical, but this can happen. You don't have to strive to acquire things to make you happy. You can be happy striving for them. And Bhagwad Gita also talks about a sense of duty, right? And the problem with most of us is that anything we do, we want to enjoy. Some of us are enjoyment maniacs. Whatever we do, from the smallest activity to the largest activity, it's the prime focus is to enjoy. Now, there's nothing wrong about enjoying life. But if every activity of yours is to enjoy life, probably this is not the right way to live. Because let's understand, everything need not culminate into enjoyment. Some acts needs to be done from a sense of duty. There's a beautiful quote by Kahil Gibran which sort of is setting the context right in this particular narrative. He says, the lust for bodily comfort murders the passion of the soul. And you will realize this, that bodily comfort is essentially what? The comfort of enjoying, right? Now I'll give you 3 different examples so that you can better resonate and correlate. Now let's say that you're a student who's preparing for an exam and you see outside in your neighborhood that there are people having a good time, right? They are playing around and having a good time. But you have set yourself a goal that this year I'm going to top in my examination, and to get that you probably need to put a lot of hours. And there's the other side of your mind who's saying just go and have a good time, enjoy life. Now what do you think would be the right duty for this person? It's obvious, right? He should study at that point of time. But if that person chooses that enjoyment, going and having a nice time with his friends, he's essentially sacrificing that time which he had devoted for that study. And he is not he is enjoying, he probably enjoyed, but he did sacrifice his time for that study, which is never going to come back. Now let's take another example. Let's say, hypothetically, you are a wife and your husband falls sick, right? Let's say your husband falls sick. And at the same time, your best friend's marriage is scheduled, right? Let's take this hypothetical scenario. Now, a dutiful wife, a wife who understands the weightage of this word duty, she will probably say no to the marriage and will cater to the needs of her husband. But a woman, a wife who doesn't understand what duty means, who doesn't understand what commitment means, she'll prioritize her enjoyment over commitment. And she'll just go and have a happy time. Now, do you think this will serve as a good way for that relationship on a long term? What do you think that husband will try to understand from her wife's conduct? Right? So essentially the point I'm trying to drive is that relationship is going to be empty, because that husband will realize that probably my wife, the number one priority in her life is enjoying over commitment. The person who sort of prioritizes enjoyment over commitment, he's going to be a failure in every dimension of life. Because we are always going to be filled with allurements for enjoying life. But if our priorities are crystal clear, and we know what choice demands my attention, even though it's not going to make me feel good, probably it's not going to make me feel enjoyed, but still I do it from a sense of duty. A beautiful quote by Mike Tyson, he said, that I hated the idea to go to gym on a day-to-day basis. But still I told myself, let me suffer now and become a champion for the rest of your life. The simple act of exercise, right? It's an act of discomfort. I mean, why would I exercise every day on a day-to-day basis? But people who are athletes, they will understand how having a strict exercise regime is an absolute indispensable requirement for their peak performance. Now, if they start choosing their bodily comfort, their bodily enjoyments over their commitment towards exercising, they are bound to failure. Now, I gave you three different examples. One example was pertaining to performance, preparation for performance, right? One was pertaining to relationships. Oftentimes, we need to value commitment over enjoyment. Because people who value enjoyment over commitment, the relationship is going towards an end. Because these people don't understand the fundamental basis of any relationship. When there is a sense of duty over your own personal enjoyment, that person is highly regarded. I often like to talk about my own parents, right? Because they're exemplary examples of what grit, power and sacrifice, willpower, grit and sacrifice really means. Now I stay in a 3 BHK independent house in Bangalore. Not a 3 BHK, sorry, a G+3 story building, wherein there are 2 levels which we have rented out for the rental accommodation, and over top of that I stay in a magnanimous duplex house. Now this is not something very normal in Bangalore, right? And essentially it's not normal for someone who doesn't have ancestral backing. My parents are self-made individuals. Every brick in this house was built because of their hard labor. They had a lot of opportunities in their life where they could have had a chill time, they could have enjoyed life. But they sacrificed those moments of enjoyment so that they could create this mastery, so that they can create this house which I'm so proud of. Every day when I look at my house, my heart is filled with pride, and also I get a little teary-eyed with gratitude because I understand the effort, grit, the determination which goes into making this property. And coming from a middle class background, you will understand how difficult it is to construct an independent house, a house which looks huge from all material standards. And this concept, right, of duty over comfort, this can be applied in any dimension. Any person who has achieved great in life, you will see that person has sacrificed immensely. Now, sacrifice is not a bad word, right? Sacrifice doesn't mean that you cannot enjoy life. Sacrifice essentially means you know what your priorities are, and you don't always prioritize enjoyment over commitment. Now, I was listening to this podcast by Jaya Kishori, right? Recently, she did a video with Beer Biceps, and he shared something very intuitive, and I found that really insightful. She said that many people come to me and they say that you started doing the katha, the spiritual kathas at a very young age. You probably never lived your childhood, right? You missed your childhood. She gives a very witty reply to that. She says, yes, you're right, I missed my childhood, but I don't regret. Because I knew why I was sacrificing that was. I knew the reason why I was sacrificing the childhood for. Because if I hadn't sacrificed what I did at that point of time, probably I would also be like the other kids in the town, right? I probably would not have risen to this level in my own career. Now, this gives us a very insightful understanding, because oftentimes, why do we not focus on our goals? Why do we shirk away from responsibility? The reason is we look at the society, the way they are functioning. And if how they are functioning, if it doesn't fit the way we want to function, we say that there's something wrong with us. FOMO, fear of missing out, is all about societal conditioning. The reason I brought about this concept here is most of us need to be authentic to ourselves. Sure, there's nothing wrong in enjoying, but if enjoyment is the central purpose of your life, you are going to live a very shallow life. And you probably will never understand what was missing in my life. right? And also talking about this concept, the core philosophy of Karma Yoga, Krishna says in the Gita, the people who realized Brahman are the people who sort of always work with a sense of devotion and work with a sense of duty without a sense of proprietorship over the results. And this is a sure shot way of bliss. Because remember, if you are engaged in any activity and if you are thinking about the results of that activity without fully engaging yourself in that activity, you are not going to achieve the state which modern day psychologists called as flow, which is a state of psychological optimal performance. Hope my today's video gave you a lot of insights as to what this whole philosophy of Karma Yoga is. It's all about having a greater purpose in life which is beyond your personal aspirations. And also remember this, if you consider rewards, if you are expecting rewards out of service, that service becomes labor. If you do something for someone with an open heart, that act of service in itself is a reward. Don't expect that the other person will be grateful for you. Because let's understand, let's face the reality. We live in a very ungrateful world. No matter what you do to the other person may probably call it limited. Probably he might not appreciate your efforts. So that does not mean that you should stop doing. There's a beautiful story which probably fits in right in this context. There was a story, this is a narrative. So once what happens, a person, an onlooker, is sort of witnessing a scene. He's saying that there's a rishi out there near the ocean and he's sort of lifting up a scorpion. He's trying to assist the scorpion to cross the ocean, right? And every time he lifts the scorpion and he walks certain steps, the scorpion stings him and he leaves the scorpion. And the next time he lifts it, again it stings and then again he leaves the scorpion. But the rishi doesn't stop carrying the scorpion and helping him cross the ocean. The onlooker who was looking all this episode from a distance, he goes and talks to that rishi, are you nuts? What the hell are you doing, man? That scorpion is stinging you back to back, but still why are you doing what you're doing? The rishi gives a very witty reply. He says, the scorpion's nature is to sting. The scorpion's nature is to be ungrateful. But if he is not living his nature of a scorpion, why should I live my nature of being of help, being of service? Now this reply sort of was very captivating for the onlooker. Oftentimes, we shirk away from responsibility, from the goodness of our life when we see something evil, when we see something bad, when we witness ungrateful people. But we shouldn't sort of stop practicing goodness because someone else was not grateful for that. When a person is ungrateful, it only shows their character. It does not say anything about your work. Understand this. I hope my today's video brought a lot of sense and we talked about a lot of different concepts. And my main focus in making these videos was to develop this sense of spiritual inquisitiveness, no matter which school of thought you belong to. Because remember, this is the true jewel, this is the true property which every soul can carry with him even after he loses everything in his life, right? Essentially, this quote, khali aat aayenge, khali aat jayenge, is not completely true. We came with a certain set of qualities, certain set of inherent traits, and we are going to live our present costume, bodily costume, with a certain level of spiritual acumen and spiritual traits. Thank you so much for your time on my video, and I'll meet you in the next video. Bye.